Hi, welcome to Explorations in Economic History. And today we're going to talk about the path to Stalinism and whether there were any alternatives offered by anyone in the Bolshevik Party. When people speak about the inevitability of Stalin and Stalinism in the Soviet Union, there are really two parts to that. The first is whether a thug, a most vicious and brutal individual, it would inevitably rise to the top in the Soviet system. And the second question is whether even if a very docile personality had succeeded Lenin and had become the next leader, or the leadership was shared, if they put through the same policies, because the policies were agreed upon by the whole party, then would it inevitably have been essentially a Stalinist system anyway? So many have argued that Stalin went against the Bolshevik Party when he pushed through forced collectivization. However, if Bukharin or Trotsky or the entire party had been the successor to Lenin, would they also have pushed through forced collectivization? So if they all believed in collectivization and if NEP was falling apart, then was there another alternative? And for example, could the people have been encouraged to want to collectivize? Could it have been done in a voluntary manner? Or inevitably, whoever was leading the party, would it have to have been a forced collectivization unless the party gave up on the plan altogether and had gone back to markets? Um, so some might argue that details might have differed, but that any leader would have been forced along a similar path. So there were some in the party who argued against some of the tactics that were used, and who a lot of people will look back on and say, oh, look, they were more democratic, they were against Stalinism. And Trotsky argued that he was against Stalinism. However, their own platform that they put forward as what they would do if they were to take power, um, well, did they really differ in a way that would have produced different results? Or were they only arguing against the results that they saw, the outcome of the policies, and the actual policies that they had wouldn't have differed in a meaningful way? So there's a book called The Russian Communist Left. It's a collection of essays, and the author writes, at every step in its degeneration, the degeneration into Stalinism, voices were raised inside the party in protest. But I wonder whether the policies that were agreed upon between Stalin and the communist left of the party weren't the ones that actually led to those results that they were protesting against. So, for example, in the early years, and most of our examples would be from the early years because once Stalin did take power, there was no possibility of offering an alternative. Um, so in the early years, there was the Democratic Centralists, and this quote is from the same book, and the essay is again in favor of left communism in general, but the author had to concede that the Democratic Centralists had no concrete proposals for reducing centralization and increasing democracy, because they were in favor of the centralization necessary for planning, because they favored common ownership, and they favored uniting the people, and they favored all of the general Bolshevik line, Bolshevik Marxist line. So they didn't, if they had won power, would it have been any more democratic? And similarly, there was the workers' opposition, and they never challenged the notion that the party had to control the state. And if the party had to control the state, then all of their other proposals, such as giving a bit more power to trade unions, probably wouldn't have been any different, because if the party controlled the state, then they would control the trade unions as well. So they suggested sending a representative from the trade unions up to the core centralized hierarchy, which they advocated. They advocated a vertical hierarchy of councils that would oversee the economy, and if they believed in the same hierarchy of Soviets, of councils, then it's not clear how their call for more representation of the workers and so on would have really changed anything much. Probably the most significant faction within the Bolshevik Party was called the Left Opposition. And this article that I'm quoting from is The Left Opposition as an Alternative to Stalinism. And the author is essentially arguing that more attention should be paid to how the left opposition would have provided an alternative. However, the article doesn't really clarify how they would have done this. There's just a couple of quotes because he doesn't say much about their alternative policies and how they would have provided a real alternative, but he does say that they had an almost mythical faith in the proletariat and its international solidarity, and were much less willing than Lenin to resort to methods of command and discipline. However, the leader of the left opposition was Trotsky, and when he was in power with Lenin in the early period, in the war communism period, he was very willing to resort to methods of command and discipline. And in fact, he also wrote theoretical articles about why command and discipline were okay. And he argued when he was in power that anyone against using command and discipline was against the dictatorship of the proletariat and the attempt to build socialism and communism in Russia. So it's not clear that if the left opposition had come to power and Trotsky instead of Stalin had been leader in the Stalinist, in that period, that he would have been any different than Stalin, that he would have been something other than Stalinist.